Number 1. Stumbling. This really did happen on the spur of the moment. In my family, my parents really didn't care much about what I did as a teenager. I mean, some of it might have had something to do with the time period too. This happened in the 70s, which is when I was a teenager. I was chewing tobacco from when I was like 12, and smoking just a few years later. I didn't start drinking until I was about 15 years old, and even then my friends' parents didn't care, and would often buy a case of beer and let us hang out and drink it, probably just for us to be out of their hair. But I also think it was because it was the stuff that they did when they were our age. I was drinking over at my friend Jimmy's house. To just give you an idea of how long ago this was, Jimmy had a Pong video game system, and it was like the most advanced thing that we could conceive of at the time. I was over there playing with him and another friend of mine, drinking, and having a fun time in his basement. He had a fully furnished basement that even had a bar in it. His parents were much better off than we were at the time, which I didn't mind really. Now, one thing we weren't supposed to do was get into the other liquor in the bar. They were fine with us having the beer, but we really didn't know what was the big deal about the rest of the stuff. I figured maybe because it was expensive or something. I even remember what we were watching on television. At the time, there wasn't much that a few horny teenagers could watch that showed women. Fortunately, the Benny Hill show was on after midnight, and we always watched that. Anyway, the point was that we broke into the liquor in the bar, because we figured if it was more expensive, it would probably get us more drunk. Of course it did just this, but as we know, for other reasons. None of us were used to drinking like that, so we couldn't moderate, and before I knew it, all three of us were pretty drunk out of our minds. It gets a little weird pretty quickly, too. We lived in a rural area up in the hills. I could conceivably walk from Jimmy's house to my own house, but it would take me a while to do it. It would easily take over an hour. But the reason I bring that up is that for some reason, I decided to leave his house on my own. The plan had been, as it always was, for me to spend the night and go back the next day. Later, when the three of us sobered up, no one remembered exactly why I had left the house, but for some reason I did. Unlike my friends who just woke up the following day with no memories, I did begin to get my wits somewhat around me a little bit after I had left. I recall finding myself walking along the dirt road by myself. I think that it might have been the cool air in the night that brought me out of whatever the somewhat drunken, blacked-out phase I was in. However, at that point, I was neither sober nor even aware of where I was. Still, for some reason, I was walking out in the dark along a country road. I was too way out of it, though, to know where I was or anything that was going on. However, I was walking in a certain direction when I became aware again, and decided it was best to just keep walking that way. It was a long walk to get to my house from his, and there were some houses in between. I was so out of it that I was hoping that I would get to the house, and even convincing myself that I would be fine as long as I could make it there. Unfortunately for me, as I was going along, there were other moments when I was blacked out, but obviously still walking. I would suddenly become aware of where I was, and then it would all go black again. Thinking back, I realized how lucky I am that I didn't end up falling down one of the hills and killing myself, or wandering down to the main road and getting hit by a car. Now this part I remember exactly like this. Everything was black again for a short time, and then suddenly, I was somewhere off the road, and there was a really big man coming at me, and he had a machete in his hand. He was coming right at me. Even in my intoxicated state, I could tell it wasn't someone that I knew, and I was overcome with fright. I stumbled as I was trying to turn around. I quickly got right up on my feet, though, or at least it seemed quickly in my memory, and I began running and stumbling down what I discovered was a dirt driveway. I looked back and saw the man was there, and then everything was black again. The very next time I came to, it was in the morning, and someone was helping me up. I was still groggy, but realized it was Jimmy's dad. He helped me into his car, and drove me back to his house, and put me into bed. None of us remember why I left the house to walk home, but in the morning, when Jimmy's parents checked in on them, they realized we had gotten into the hard liquor, and that I was gone, and he went out looking for me. When I told them later what I remembered, I had been walking in the opposite direction of my house, and stumbled into the yard of a hermit named Dave, who really hated when anyone stepped onto his yard. He was known to have wounded people in the past who had been on his property. All Jimmy's dad could figure was that he must have decided not to hurt me because I was drunk or because I was a kid. We didn't know, and no one was going to go to Dave's house to find out. Number 2. The Porch. When my mom passed away, when I was still very young, my dad, understandably, had a really hard time dealing with it. My parents were the type who always kept loving each other deeply after they got married. They were very affectionate, and I guess he wasn't looking forward to ever having to live in a world that she wasn't in. Dad developed some deep psychological issues. There was one point when he felt like he had to spend some time in a psychiatric hospital. I didn't really know at the time what was going on. I mean, I was 11, but it was still really difficult to understand. So when he went to spend his time in the hospital, I went to stay with my aunt for a period of time. My aunt lived in a semi-rural area. It wasn't like it was in the middle of nowhere or anything like that. The houses weren't too far spread apart, but they were also all pretty old houses, and I don't think that many of them were inhabited. While I was there, I really had to spend a lot of time by myself. Both my aunt and my uncle worked, and they didn't have any children, so I would be home by myself for periods of time if I wasn't in school. There were also not a lot of other kids around in the area, other than a kid that I didn't get along with because he was basically a bully. There was one house that was pretty close to my aunt's house, though. It was a good little walk down the road, but I could see the chimney from my aunt's house. It was the only one that was really close, and it was a bigger and nicer-looking house than ours. But according to my aunt, no one lived in the house. However, there were times when I wondered if she knew what she was talking about. What I mean is that there were times when I would be out for a walk, and I would look over at the house and think that I noticed someone in one of the windows. I never noticed any lights coming on in the house, but I swore that on more than one occasion, I noticed that there was smoke coming out of the chimney. When I brought this up to my aunt and uncle, they told me that whoever owned the house probably had to come around and start a fire in the fireplace every now and then to keep the house from getting too cold and wet. On a weekend day, I was home by myself. I was looking over at the house and I thought that I noticed smoke coming out of the chimney. It was a very cold, dank, and cloudy day, so I wasn't completely positive of what I was seeing, but it got my curiosity up. I decided to go and check the house out. I thought if the owners were there, I could tell them hello or something, and then my curiosity would be taken care of. When I got up closer to the house, I began wondering what, if my aunt was telling me, could possibly be true. There were not any vehicles anywhere near the house, so it didn't make any sense to me that someone had come there to just run the fireplace. The first thing I did notice is that I was right about the smoke. There was definitely a bit of it coming out of the chimney. I have to admit I was a little nervous about going up to the house, though, but not for the reasons you might think. Mostly I didn't want to get in trouble for trespassing. If a car had come by on the road and seen me in the yard, I might get in trouble. But at least, I thought to myself, cars very rarely, if ever, came down that road. So I walked up to the house, determined to see if I could see if anyone was inside there. It had a really big porch that went around like 3/4 of the house, so I nervously got up on the porch. I looked into the front window, and I didn't see that there was anything in the fireplace there. I began thinking if maybe the chimney was connected to the back of the house, and it was coming from the kitchen. So I made my way around on the porch, assuming the kitchen was in the back. The first room I came across and looked in the window, though, was not the kitchen. It was a bedroom, and what I saw was horrifying. There was someone who was tied down to the bed in the room. She didn't notice me, though, and as I looked, someone came into the room and yelled at and even slapped her once before leaving. The entire time that this was going on, I was shaking at my knees, pretty terrified as to what was going on. Hell, I had a problem getting up and leaving. I was scared any noise I made getting off the porch would be noticed, and whoever the big guy is that I had seen and who had that woman tied up would get me and do something horrible to me. It wasn't until I was done tiptoeing off the porch and then off the property that I took off running toward my aunt's house. I locked all the doors before calling her and telling her what I had seen. After making overly sure that I was sure, she ended up calling the police. The police came over to my aunt's house, but my memory is a little blurry on whether they came before or after going over to the house, or maybe both. I had thought that there was an intruder hiding in the house who had kidnapped someone. It turned out that the big guy that I saw was the guy who had owned the house, though. However, they did end up searching the house and found the tied-up girl. It actually was his wife, too, and she had been in the process of leaving him. However, rather than just leave her abusive husband, she told him about it first, and he was determined it wasn't going to happen. I don't know, really, what happened after that. I've tried to find information on the case in the following years, but never have. I don't recall the names involved, but I hope she was able to divorce him in peace. Number 3. Writing poetry. I had a horrible time in one of the schools I went to when I was younger. My family moved around a whole lot. Sometimes I would only be in school for a short period of time before moving on to another. I recall being in one school for less than 2 months before we moved on again. It was just something that my family did. My parents would rent a place for a small amount of time, and depending on how they spent their limited money, they would either remain there for a year or end up moving on pretty quickly. So I had a hard time making friends. After a while, it became too much of a chore to even try to make friends. I always thought if I did, I would end up being alone one day anyway when we moved. So why would I put myself through that? So I ended up keeping to myself a lot, and when I did, I ended up the target of bullies in some of the places I went to. I didn't really mind it for the most part because very few bullies would ever do anything to me. Most of them were terrified of my older brother. We were nothing alike, so people didn't assume immediately that we were brothers. However, once they found out, they would continue to pick on me, but not start fights with me. But there was one bully who I will call Tom, who wasn't afraid of my brother at all. And it was really weird because my brother had beaten the crap out of him on more than one occasion to get him to leave me alone. But that just made him even worse. We lived way out of town, and I normally felt pretty safe when I was at home. Very few people lived close to us, and the forests weren't ever picking on me, so I was happy to hang out in them. There was one day in the summer that I was trying to write some poetry or something. I used to like to go out into the woods and do that. Most of my poetry was then mostly about nature at the time, and writing it generally made me feel pretty good about myself. I was out walking in the woods, looking for a good place to park myself and try to be inspired. It was then that a succession of really strange things began to happen that culminated in the scariest experience of my life. First, I had seen someone out in the woods that I did not recognize. Well, I couldn't recognize them because of the way they were dressed. I'd never come across anyone in the woods like that before, so it was hard for me to get comfortable. Although the person came nowhere near me, I could tell that they were staring at me and watching me, and as I began trying to find a place away from them, I saw them again a few more times. I finally decided to just go home. This person wasn't confronting me, so I didn't think they were trying to confront me concerning trespassing, but just the fact that they kept watching me wasn't going to make the experience any more pleasant. So even though I had hiked pretty far from my home for no reason, I decided to make my way back without having gotten anything done. And that is when the succession of really strange things accelerated. First, as I was walking home, I kept looking around, trying to see if I could still see the person out there. I caught sight of him several times, and each time it did seem like he was closer. It could have been in my head, but I don't really think that it was. I was a little nervous, but still thought I would be fine. That is until the strangest thing happened. Passing by a creek, I noticed that there was a third person out there too, but it only took a few minutes for me to realize that this was even worse. The third person was Tom, and it was shocking to me how he could have been out there. I did find out later that even though he didn't live in the area that I lived, his grandma did, and he always spent a month with her in the summer. He had no idea until that very moment that he saw me that I lived there either, but he was very happy when he saw me and immediately began coming toward me. I was quickly thinking this would be the worst day of my life. I was being pursued by two people, and I was a good enough distance away from home still. I tried to get away from Tom, but he caught up with me really quickly. He punched me once and then pushed me to the ground. He was holding me by the back of the neck and pressing my face harshly into the ground. To anyone who has ever been bullied really bad in life, you know how I felt at that time. I truly thought that I was going to be beaten to death, or at least severely hurt. I had never been so scared in my life as I was at that moment. And then something happened. The weight was suddenly off of me, but before I could get up on my own, I felt someone grab my arm and pull me up. It was then that I realized it was the guy who I had been seeing in the woods. He was holding me by the arm, and he was holding Tom by the neck. I also could see the fear in Tom's eyes, which was something I had never seen before. I was terrified too. However, I did get a small stroke of luck. Holding on to both of us was obviously difficult for the man, and the struggling put him off balance. So, I was able to break free from his grip and start running. I only looked back to see that he wasn't pursuing me, but he was dragging Tom away in the opposite direction. Now, I don't know what people will think of me. I've told this story to people before, and they haven't liked the fact that I left Tom with the man. However, with everything Tom had done to me in life, it wasn't like I owed him anything. He relentlessly bullied me, and sympathy for him just wasn't going to happen. I didn't find out for a long time what happened. There was no internet back in those days, and when school started back up again, Tom was absent for the first couple of months. I was worried that the guy had killed him, but eventually Tom came back. He was a much different person, though. I could tell he was withdrawn, and began keeping to himself just like I did. What I finally learned was that the man who grabbed him was his grandfather, and the grandfather ended up beating him up severely, even putting him in the hospital for a while. And no one knows why he did it, but figured he was going to do it to me too if I hadn't escaped. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. First I want to thank my paid Patreon members, starting with my 2 VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. I also want to thank Heidi H, Chronic J, Stinky News, EricaOdd, Tracy Sellars, Kelli Clark, and Broken Angel. See, 2 videos in 1 week. I've been able to do it, which means my next thing that I'll be working on will be a Patreon video. I will post an announcement on YouTube when that gets up, so in case people who don't normally check will be able to check and see that the video is there. And beyond that, I'll start working on a new video for beginning of next week as well. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat and you'd like to be, please hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of new content. Leave me a comment, which I'll do my best to get back to, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. And now I'd like to mention all my free Patreon members: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H, Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, Evil Black Cat, Lori Hicks, Lisa Herman, Krystal Robin, Hillbilly 13, RhettSchall, John Tull, Baby and Baby, Sherry Hubbard, Vina Waldren, and Pumpkin, Moo and Pepper too. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.